All right, good afternoon. It's Wednesday at noon, which means it's time for the Iowa Learning Farms webinar. I'm Matt Helmers with Iowa State University, the director of the Iowa Nutrient Research Center and involved with the Iowa Learning Farms. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to May, which is Wetlands Month. And so we started it off right with a talk about urban wetlands. So really fortunate to have John Swanson, that is the Water Resources Supervisor with Polk County Public Works, here to talk about some of his work on urban wetlands. I bet a lot of you that are on know about John's work on a variety of topics. And so he said, he can talk about a variety of things, but we're excited to have him talk today about the work he's been involved with on urban wetlands. So with that, the virtual floor is all yours, John. Again, as always, if you have questions or comments, please type those in the chat box and I will get those to John at the end of his talk. And with that, John, the virtual floor is all yours.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. And excited to be here today. Going to talk urban wetlands, which is something that I've really got to not just dabble in, but really do a lot of work in over the last 10 years across the Des Moines Metro. So going to kind of keep it high level, get a little bit into the weeds here and there, but really just share some stories of urban wetlands, specifically in the Des Moines Metro, Polk County, Central Iowa, and some of our experiences over the last few years. But before I jump in, who am I? I'm a guy who likes to lay in ditches across central Iowa. I wander outside of Polk County and I contemplate a lot about water, about what we can do. I've got the joy of working with ag and urban folks. And we have a growing team here in Polk County. I lead a team of conservationists that do all types of work related to water quality, flood control, agricultural work, urban work, work with all the cities. And we've been doing a lot of wetlands for quite a few years. And before we started, we were doing a lot of agricultural wetlands now, but we're always used to joke that we only build urban wetlands. And just recently, we found a lot more success with our agricultural wetlands. So it's been quite a learning curve. Love what I do, love sharing some of these stories, and going to share some today. But to really kick things off, being Iowa Learning Farms, I would imagine we have a pretty big agricultural contingency here. So kind of like base knowledge, like the base facts we all need to understand before we dive into these urban wetlands is really like this intro to stormwater, and stormwater being the term that we use generally to describe urban runoff. So, and when I think about urban stormwater and the things we do to interact with it, it's a very important story. And this story is when we build houses, we build rooftops, we build streets, it significantly changes the dynamics of how water comes off of our landscape. And we know that in the prairie state, when Iowa was covered in prairie, a huge amount of that water soaked into the ground. When we've altered that landscape to largely a lot of corn and soybean acres, less of that water soaks in. But to be honest, we still get significant water absorption and water still runs off the land. But when we make that next transition into cities, whether it be residential or commercial areas, the big change next is the speed and quantity of water coming off of that landscape. And not only is that water coming faster, but it's now going into pipe systems. And there, the picture on the bottom left is a storm sewer intake. So in just about every neighborhood in central Iowa in our urban areas, water makes into those pipes, and then it is piped straight to a river, stream, or lake. Common misconception with a lot of our urban folks is that water goes to Des Moines Waterworks and gets treated somewhere. Like, nope, that's the water that comes out of your toilets. The water that comes off your streets goes right into a pipe and is literally piped right to a body of water. Now, changes have occurred, like in the mid-90s. A lot of our developments now require stormwater detention. So you see a lot of those little ponds or big ponds, or the thing is sitting in front of Walgreens, that a bowl that never seems to have water in it. But up until recently, those are mainly designed just for flood control. And so unfortunately, what we see is you think about a Walmart parking lot, if it's covered in pollutants, think oils, think sediment, think anything and everything. When you get that small storm, say an inch of rain, all that's going to wash right off into those pipes, and a lot of that water gets pushed right through those basins. So kind of the next important fact for us to really understand urban runoff is we know in the ag world, we talk a lot about sediment. We talk a lot about nutrients. with this urban stormwater, what we generally see is a diverse set of pollutants, like a little bit of everything is what I call it. We see some nutrients coming off of lawns. We see bacteria from dog poop. We see oils from cars. We see sediments from all different types of sources, active construction sites. So a mix of pollutants. And then I would say for our urban areas, our biggest issue from the stormwater largely is the picture on the bottom right there. This is a picture I love to use because it's so terrible. This is actually a neighborhood in the metro called Brook Run. When these houses were built, there was a small brook. It was a foot wide, foot deep stream. People loved it. They're like, oh, I have this little natural area behind my house. And what happened is more houses got built in that sub watershed. The speed of the water changed, and the characteristics of the stream then quickly changed as well. And that 1 foot deep, 1 foot wide stream became 20 foot wide and 10 foot deep. So slowing the water down is a really big deal. And how do we do this? One way to do it is we actually work with on a homeowner by homeowner basis. A presentation for another time, but we've actually worked with thousands of homeowners across the Des Moines Metro to do things like build rain gardens, improve their soils, permeable pavers, rain barrels. But to be totally honest, there's a lot of houses in Des Moines Metro. And with this methodology on a very small scale, you're always fighting that battle is can we get enough homeowners to install practices to slow the water down enough, filter that water, and avoid those negative consequences of diverse pollutants and streams that are quickly degrading due to speed. So this is kind of tactic one, tactic I'm not going to talk about today, but again, a great presentation for another day. But where we've spent most of our time in recent years is actually looking at urban wetlands, hence the Wetlands 101, which we hear the term end of pipe treatment a lot in our ag world. It's the exact same thing that we can do in the urban landscape is what if we plopped a wetland down at, say, the end of that pipe, and we could in one location treat a whole bunch of houses, a whole bunch of businesses. Think tens of acres. We've had wetlands that we've installed that treat up to 500 acres. We've looked at sites that treat up to 1,000 acres. But I will tell you, installing one wetland, it has its own difficulties, but in many times it is much more, it seems time effective than to say work with 50 homeowners to install practices if we can install one wetland. And that's really where we started was like, okay, this seems like a much better use of our time if we can install these wetlands. And then we also get all those other side benefits that we'll touch on today as well. And that kind of breaks us into the two types of wetlands that we're mainly doing that you're going to see a lot of in the Des Moines Metro and across our urban areas in Iowa. The first one being our main tool is actually a stormwater wetland. So here's actually a drone footage of a newly installed stormwater wetland. Very important that these are actually a fully engineered structure that are designed to really combat those negative consequences of rooftops and streets. And the main one being they focus on rate control. So the goal for these wetlands is water comes in very quickly. This wetland fills up and it goes through multiple stages in the wetland. So the first spot's there is a forebay to collect sediments. It then has to flow around multiple shallow and deep water areas, all being forced to work a lot harder. And at the end of the day, rather than what used to be a pipe just cutting through this field, the pipe gets daylighted. And we have an outlet structure that has multiple stages. And those stages basically, what they do is they help us achieve the design goal of whether we get 1 inch of rain or 7 inches of rain. The rate at which water is leaving this wetland matches a prairie condition. So when effectively designed, a stormwater wetland can basically create a runoff scenario that matches prairie speed, and you get those natural filtration benefits. Not as much when you have just dirt growing around it, but when we get into that prairie wetland vegetation, you get that full circle treatment. And the resource that exists in Iowa that provides that direct guidance to our engineers, our cities, myself, is the Iowa Stormwater Management Manual. If you ever want to read yourself to sleep, feel free to dive into that manual. It's hundreds of pages long, but it's very important that it really guides, similar to like when we build, many times we're following NRCS standards and specifications for, say, a ag wetland or a terrace. This manual provides the same guidance for all of our urban practices that we install. Opposite of that is we probably heard of an oxbow restoration. We've had the joy of we've constructed over 25 urban oxbows in the Des Moines Metro, and largely was because we went on a tour one day in the Boone River watershed, and we're like, these are cool. Unrestored oxbows being naturally occurred, disconnected stream channels. A lot of times they've been filled in with sediments. They're shallow. They're prone to freeze. Sometimes they're completely dry. You restore an oxbow. You provide storage opportunities for flooding. You can daylight tile into them. We daylight storm sewers into them. They become little mini fish factories. They provide all these habitat benefits. And we came quickly to realize that there were actually oxbows across our urban areas. Many times they were in parklands, managed by parks departments. And we're like, what if we approach those folks just like landowners and share with them, hey, you could do these oxbows on your properties. And that's where the story began for us with urban oxbows. So today we've installed about 25 oxbow restorations in the Des Moines Metro, in the Polk County region. And we have about a dozen of these stormwater wetlands, varying in sizes from treating, say, 20 acres up to around 500 acres. And so, again, when I got asked to come talk here today, say, John, hey, come talk for 20 minutes about urban wetlands, I always think about, like, how do you tell the story of, like, what these wetlands really do and, like, what can people learn about it? And I love making little lists. So I was like, hey, what are 10 things, 10 lessons we've learned about urban wetlands that people should know about? So I don't think everyone's going to remember all 10, but if you remember a couple of these, like urban wetlands are a great thing. And so let's just jump in. So number one, targeting. So when we think about where these could be built, we don't just build very similar to how we build wetlands in the ag world. A lot of times we're building them with a purpose and we're targeting. And so this is actually a map we did as an actual real activity where we have in the center here, we have Walnut Creek and we have a regional park that encompasses a lot of the floodplain. And our cities all have their storm sewer systems mapped so you can see where water is actually flowing out of pipes. Those little triangles are essentially where water is dumping into Walnut Creek. And so we oftentimes look at where do we have storm sewers that have the kind of the sweet spot for the right amount of money? Where do we have enough space? Where can we like bring everything together? Ideally, it's an area that's already a natural area, but that water maybe is just cutting right through. Where can we plop a wetland in and install it? And so a lot of times we're targeting exact locations. We comb through a watershed, an urban area, maybe a city. But we also target like, okay, who's out there that actually like is into this stuff? And when I say that, like, if you have a parks department and all they do is mow soccer fields, are they really set up to maintain and own a wetland? In some cases, you're like, yeah, we could train them. But in other cases, you have other, say, parks departments that are like really into prairies. They're really into natural areas and ecosystems. And what if you brought to them this idea and you actually targeted and approached them like you would a landowner and said, hey, we did some feasibility work and we think we could build a wetland on your property. And again, not all sites work. So we've learned how just because you can do it, like what's the best site? Like what are the best sites to do these? Because they're not cheap practices. And so once we've targeted a site, we're like, okay, we have the right landscape. We have a watershed that ideally is untreated because think about all those houses were built before the mid 90s. You have hundreds of acres of houses that drain to our creeks that have no stormwater management. So our ideal scenario is putting it into a natural park space, coming back into a neighborhood that has no stormwater management, and really putting a wetland in to slow that water down and create all those other wetland benefits. And that goes to number two. So again, here's actually a wetland in downtown Des Moines. This one treats nearly 1,000 acres in the heart of downtown Des Moines, right along the Raccoon River. But like for any site and your landowner, maybe it's a city, maybe it's the city of Ankeny. What's their goal for the site? Like, do they want to improve water quality? Like, is their goal they have a flooding issue directly downstream and we want to try and capture as much water as possible and reduce flooding? Or do we just want to improve habitat? Or is there a school right next door? You can bring all these things together, but for a stormwater wetland specifically, it's really make sure you understand the goals of this wetland site and trying to achieve as many of those goals as possible. And oxbows kind of go the same way. So many oxbows are done just in the name of restoration and habitat. But we were restoring some oxbows and there was stormwater runoff running directly adjacent to it. And we're like, well, why wouldn't we divert that water into the oxbow and help provide some additional treatment and really layer on the benefits and do more than just habitat? Number three, meet your neighbors. So I say this one somewhat jokingly, but very seriously in that you really need to talk to the people that are going to be living and interacting right next door to your wetland. Because I will tell you, just like many ag landowners, they may not view a wetland in a positive way. So, and to be real, if you build a wetland, there will be mosquitoes, there will be more wildlife, there will be snakes, there will be everything you can imagine living in a wetland. And what we've learned is you need to talk to people before you build an oxbow or before you do an urban stormwater wetland. And it's extremely important because you might have 20, 30 houses surrounding that wetland. And if they have no idea what you're doing, they will view it very negatively. So we've tried to not only be proactive, but when possible, integrate trail systems, always do good signage, and really be proactive. And that's something that goes to our site selection, but talk to these people. And to be totally honest, if you can build a site that nobody lives directly next to, like sometimes that's the easiest win of them all. And those sites will rank higher, but it does create a very important educational opportunity for talking to these people. Number 4, seeding and maintenance. Now, we build lots of different projects, and for me, these wetlands have it's maybe more important than almost any other type of practices to properly get them seeded, erosion control, and have a maintenance plan in place. Because what we want is the bottom left there, which is a beautiful array of wetland plants that are helping with that pollutant reduction. Bottom right there, you have a nice ecosystem that looks very natural and looks healthy and is in a healthy state. But these wetlands, day one, when you stop moving that dirt and water starts pushing in them, that water, like I mentioned before, it comes very fast. And if you don't have oftentimes a combination of matting, hydro seeding, really the best tools available, you will see that wetland, they will not make it to an established vegetative state. And the second piece goes like, who is going to maintain it? And what is their equipment? Really having real conversations, because this wetland could look beautiful for a year or two, but what's it going to look like in 10 years? Because if you just let it grow, what you're going to see is it's going to be completely taken over with cattails, willows, all the above. So really coming up with a good plan from day one to make sure the soil holds in place until the vegetation gets going, and that you've had real talks with whoever's going to maintain it and make sure they know what they're doing. Here we have an oxbow. This is actually like 4 oxbows together in one along Walnut Creek in the city of Urbandale. And this site turned out beautifully, and that's what you want to see. And you go out there and it's like waist deep water. We actually sampled 40 different fish species out of this oxbow after 2 years after restoration. Those fish get dumped back into Walnut Creek whenever it floods. This picture, you can still see some of that erosion matting on those side slopes. This is just a few months after installation. But what we've found is stream incision is a big thing in our urban areas. So again, our streams change quickly from building all these rooftops and roads. And that response a lot of times has been those streams have deepened themselves. They become incised and disconnected from their floodplain. And what we found is when you build these oxbows, you kind of have the expectation that they're going to look like this. But if that stream has deepened itself deeper than its original stream bed, a lot of times when you dig that oxbow down to the groundwater, it drains out more so than the ones we see like in north central Iowa. And what you get is like you get ankle to shin deep water, which is a less visually pleasing oxbow and really doesn't get that diverse, doesn't get the fish in it. It doesn't get all the things we want in that oxbow. So we've started really focusing on what are the stream conditions right next to the oxbow. And if the stream is deeply incised and say it's like 10 foot down to the stream, that means you're also going to have to dig down 10 foot to hit that groundwater in the oxbow. So it makes it less cost effective. So which is something that we just experienced in our urban landscape that maybe we hadn't seen in other parts of the state where we'd been looking at oxbows. Going number 6, all these wetlands, if you've ever come into someone's backyard and you've moved 10, 20, 30,000 cubic yards of dirt, it's quite an undertaking. And we found, we call those spoils. You're digging dirt out of these wetlands, you're going to construct it. And the beauty of working in farm fields is a lot of times you can utilize the farm fields right adjacent to it. You can spread that dirt. You can find creative ways to dispose of it. Well, the single thing that's going to make or break many wetland sites is where can you take those spoils? How can you get it out of the neighborhood? How can you not crush city roads with thousands of dump trucks? And really, at the end of the day, this is what's going to make your wetland cost $100,000 or $1 million is really going to be what's your plan for the spoils. So just sprinkling in construction in there. This is my main talking point from day one when we start talking about a site. And roads in town, they have weight restrictions. If every road has a weight restriction getting to your site, that's gonna cause you some headaches. Number 7, forebay, forebay, forebay. Who knows what a forebay is? I do because I said it 4 times there in one sentence. But something we do on all of our stormwater wetlands and some of the floodplain wetlands is if you have a pipe or any incoming source of urban runoff, you're going to have sediment coming into your wetland. It's going to happen. So these forebays are essentially a small pond that are excavated extra deep at the head of the wetland. And their intent is to capture that sediment, because what we don't want is sediment coming into our wetlands and filling them in day one. So this is a way that we actually designed. As you can see, there's a very flat shelf around this forebay, and it is designed so it catches all the sediment in say 5 to 10 years is kind of our norm. You're going to have to come in and dig that sediment out so you can gain that storage capacity back. Very important. It's kind of funny. Like, we've looked at sub watersheds and like there's no active construction. Like, you wouldn't expect a lot of sediment coming off of that landscape, but it does. We always see sediment coming into these, and forebays are the way that we combat handling that sediment. And it's actually one of the design requirements for stormwater wetlands. Number 8, we're getting close. We got 10. We got 4 more minutes. Don't be afraid to think big. Credit the city of Des Moines for this one. They thought big. They had about 1,000 acres draining downtown Des Moines that was dumping right into, you can see the Raccoon River. You can see Gray's Lake right behind there. And they had a vision for a neighborhood that surrounded a wetland that had a natural feel in the heart of downtown. And they were able to construct a wetland that had a extremely long flow path. That water had to work around a giant horseshoe wetland before getting out. And this wetland provides numerous water quality, flood control benefits. But again, if you were to think, well, most of our wetlands drain less than 100 acres, 1,000 acres, that sounds crazy. But it can be done. It's just you don't know until you dive in. Same thing goes for oxbows. We've been able to do, we have some channelized streams in the Des Moines Metro in our urban areas. And a man-made disconnected oxbow, it might actually be like a half mile of stream. And we've been able to tackle doing more than just a little horseshoe oxbow, but doing some bigger ones. Number 9, this is a kind of a unique opportunity. So we talked about the negatives of those same neighbors, same picture, but think about the diversity you can bring to a project. If you build a wetland that's in the middle of nowhere, like, people don't really get to enjoy it. They don't know it's there. And usually when we're talking these urban wetlands, you have kind of an unprecedented opportunity to think about wildlife, use it as an educational opportunity. We built these things right next to schools. Think about recreation. Think about kids getting to play in water like we've probably all enjoyed in our childhood. People in suburbia, they don't always have that connection to the natural environment. And these wetlands are a great way to provide that connection and help people kind of realize these benefits of our natural areas. And we've made it to number 10, the cliche end to the presentations, but like, opportunities for a brighter future. There's my little kids playing in a river. And what's been interesting is, like, many of us conservation professionals, we spend all this time like working on these projects, and these urban wetlands have really opened the door to all these other people that like really care, whether just their neighbor who were initially adversary, and once they learn about it, they're like our biggest supporters. They're mayors or city council members. They're all these folks that live in urban areas that they just don't interact many times with the natural environment like folks who live out in the country get to. And these wetlands have provided an opportunity, because you can come in and they might know that they have a flooding issue, and a wetland could help them achieve that flooding issue. And then along the way, they can learn all this stuff. And so, like, my big takeaway at the end, these wetlands, they open the door to more conversations, more partnerships, and cleaner water, so we can all go play out there in the creek and have a good time with our kids. So with that, I think I'm right on time, 25 minutes, and we'll turn it back over to Matt and Elena.
Okay. Thanks, John. Yeah, right on time. Perfect. And get your questions in. We've gotten a few, but others, if you have them, get them in. If you are on today and want to earn a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW, at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. Include your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Again, Elena Whitaker, ALENAW, at iastate.edu. Okay, next slide, John. Should be our voluntary demographic survey, if I remember correct. Yep, if you watch this webinar live and are willing to fill out the voluntary demographic survey, we'd greatly appreciate it. Only one survey response is needed for all 2024 webinars. You can scan that QR code or go to iowalearningfarms.org/survey. So if you do that, we would greatly appreciate it. Really, really helps us. And then I think a plug for the webinar next week. Wendong Zhang is going to talk about decoding Iowa farmers' understanding of edge of field practice. Wendong and Jackie Comito have been working a little bit at that on some unique ways of trying to understand edge of field practices or the farmer's understanding of that. So I think that'll be a useful one for those of us working in edge of field practices. Okay, John, we've gotten a few questions here. Oh yeah, before I forget, okay, sorry. We had a request from a farmer to put the Iowa Learning Farms webinars on YouTube because then he'd just get a notice when there's a new one was up there. So we actually have an Iowa Learning Farms webinar playlist, I guess, on YouTube. So you can go there, subscribe, and then you get notified. Again, as always, all of our webinars, as long as myself or somebody else remembers to hit record, are all up on the either the Learning Farms website or now YouTube. Okay, with that, you didn't get on to hear me talk, so let's ask John some questions. First one, John, how do you suggest dealing with accumulated sediment over time?
Yep. So it's something we're constantly battling with our wetlands. Honestly, sometimes our ag ones too. And for me, it's all about proper planning on the front end. Like just expect it to be coming. Usually, we're looking at we have those 4 bays. We pump out the water, and we're usually coming with an excavator, and you're loading it into dump trucks, and you're taking it somewhere. But again, think about it. If you're on the back end, you're like, where are we going to take it? If that spot's 30 minutes away, that is not a good site. Hauling wet material is very difficult. Think about when you get an excavator, well, there's no path to get an excavator down here. That's a big deal. So that's again on the front end. How are you going to get in there? How are you going to deal with it? Just have that conversation. Usually you're working with wet material. You're going to want to have a spot as close as possible. You want that spot out of the floodplain. But those are some of the tricks. But usually it's excavating out, it's loading into dump trucks and having a spot nearby to dispose of it, let it dry out. And then a lot of times we just seed on top of it and you wouldn't even know it's there.
Okay. Next one, will diverting stormwater to a natural oxbow destroy the natural wetland habitat found in that oxbow?
So that's a good question. And that's something we've been looking into as we've slowly started adding in more and more water into these. To be totally honest, we haven't seen a negative response yet, but the danger is that sometimes we do see more like we see things like oil spills. We sometimes unfortunately see like dumping happens in these storm sewers. That's one of the bigger risks for me is like if we have one of those events, that could be detrimental to the wetland. But as far as like the normal stormwater pollutants we're seeing, usually we're seeing all those same filtration benefits, and we're not seeing a negative impact to the oxbow wetland. And that's at least what we've seen so far. But we're continuing to like kind of push the envelope and making sure we're being like testing and being conscientious of it as we go.
Yeah, that's kind of a tough one because, if it wasn't for that oxbow, that oil or something coming from the storm sewer would go right to the stream anyway. So, like it might be impactful for the oxbow, but it might be better for the stream. So okay. Is there a difference between restored oxbow and other wetlands in their function or purpose?
Yes, very much so. So in its simplest form, I'd say like an oxbow restoration, its main purpose is restoring the function of that wetland. It is bringing back that permanent pool to it's adding that oxygenated water when you dig it down to the groundwater. But it generally offers minimal like rate control. So that's why we are conscientious about dumping too much water into it because a stormwater wetland on the opposite end of the spectrum, the most important part of that is the outlet structure. And that outlet structure is designed so based on how much water is coming into the wetland, it's regulating how fast that water leaves. Because again, that's what's causing most of our issues to our streams is the water's too fast. So the stormwater wetland, it uses multiple depths of water, vegetation, and an outlet structure and a 4-bay to all work together to slow down the water and then provide that filtration benefit and settling benefits that we want. And that again comes down to what are your goals? If your goal is mainly to like restore a natural wetland, there may be a scenario like maybe we don't want to dump stormwater into it. Maybe you just want to focus on that natural habitat. But if your goal is water quality or flood control, you're really going to need to look at how can we slow that water down? And we're now starting to look at, for bigger oxbows, what if we also coupled that with an outlet structure on the backside of that oxbow? So you have kind of a spectrum based upon largely like what are your goals for the site?
Okay. Have you been involved in any water quality testing on any of these wetlands?
Yes, we've not only on the wetlands, but we also have a monitoring network of about 80 sites across Polk County that get monitored on a biweekly basis. And part of that came from just like we have a lot of county staff. Uh, we have county conservation. So actually many of our staff are all assigned to sites. So we can just take kind of a DIY approach to knowing what's happening on our watersheds. And that actually is a great way we actually find out if there are, say, like spillages or anything in our watersheds. But we've also done some targeted studies on a few of these sites. That's actually where we've gotten a lot of the data about like what's in the water. Like I know 10 years ago, we all thought that like golf courses had a major nutrient input. We just haven't seen that because we've tested for it. And we've also been testing like the effectiveness of different practices because, to be honest, a lot of them are rather new to Iowa. They were being done for a lot longer, like on a lot of the coasts of the US. But we're still trying to figure out what are the most effective practices and applicabilities for urban practices. So the testing has been an ongoing thing, and there's an urban conservation team at IDALS, and they really spearhead a lot of that practice testing as well.
Okay. Do you know, is some of that practice testing available on the Polk County website or other locations?
There's really not a great clearinghouse of it. A
Okay.
lot of them are end up being through published research. Research is
Okay.
oftentimes like the end goal. The study that I was personally most involved in is we did a sub watershed study around Easter Lake where we're actually like trying to quantify the like how much flow are we actually reducing, how much are we actually filtering, and did a side by side study. In that case, just working with homeowners to install practices in their front and backyards, and had some like kind of eye opening positive results. But a lot of it's out there, but I think we need to do a better job of kind of having it more easily shared.
Okay. Yeah, because there've been a couple questions on that on what tracking had been done on pollutants. So yeah, any way we could help get some of that information out there, I think we'd be
Yeah.
interested. There's a couple questions here on what plant species you may be seeding into the wetlands.
Yep. So like what's interesting is these wetlands they offer maybe so to start like think about like a traditional like nutrient reduction crepe style wetland, right? They're generally flow through structure. So water flows in. Their goal is to get back to their base water as fast as possible to get that back to that nutrient reduction mode. These stormwater wetlands, what they're much more bouncy. Like they increase in flows and then they slowly release, and they're always going up and down. So to be honest, it's kind of made as we're always kind of evolving. Like, what's the most effective seeding types and the effective plants, and how do you give it the best chance for it to kind of move and find its the right spots? But what we're doing right now generally is we're planting true wetland species in the bottom and on the edges of those pools where we're going to see a lot of regular wetness. And we're generally moving to more of a mesic on the tops of our berms, which can survive being wet for short amounts of time. And we used to see the whole thing to wetland plants. Well, then realistically, like a lot of the upland area, they're only wet for like a day or two here and there. And that wasn't working well. So it's been kind of a moving target, especially for stormwater wetlands. And those, the bigger the drainage area, the more the diverse impacts of that water. So for oxbows, we generally have like we try to do wetland plants along the edges and more of a mesic mix on the side slopes and above. And where possible, we like to do. You can spend a lot of money on this, but it can be very serious to do actual plantings of where you want those wetland plants to go. But the thing that we now find as an active fight is the geese will literally come in and eat all those plants. So we've got a couple cities that have actually utilized snow fence to protect those plants, and it worked very well. They don't want to land in between the snow fence,
Okay.
so you got to protect the investment.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. There was one person curious about siting. Have you noticed that the local socioeconomic conditions are associated with any, more likelihood or less likelihood of being interested in these urban wetlands?
Yes, and it's kind of like it's something that we're trying to tease out now, and it's kind of across the board with urban practices. We've seen those folks that have more money generally are more like they have more time to become educated. They have more time to like, and this can be good or bad, but they're going to be more invested in the project. And a lot of times from the lower, like the neighborhoods that have lower socioeconomic status, you're generally not going to get as good a turnout to like public meetings and things like that. And it's not because they're distant. It's just like I don't. We believe they don't like have time and the ability like to make it to those meetings. But they will feel the same perceived negative effects of like like prairies don't look good year one, year two.
Mhm.
And so we have found that we need to like really come to those people and really be very conscientious of like, so if I work with a city, we'll have very real talks about like what's the actual plan? Is it gonna be successful? Like how are we gonna talk to these neighbors? Like we need to literally talk to them. And if we don't, like there's negatives. Like that's not a good thing. We need to make sure that they're supportive and on board. And language barriers is a real thing too.
The next one, these wetlands have huge downstream benefits in terms of, water flow. Are there any risk upstream from water backing up, and how do you manage that risk
I'd
or
say there,
perception of that risk? So, yeah.
yeah, it's I'd say we've never had bad experiences, and largely that comes down to good design. And I feel like we're in a state now where we have a lot of designers who like know what they're doing. But you have to look at like, especially if you're getting into like flood control benefits, and you're looking at storing a lot of water, potentially deep water for short amounts of time, and like what happens when the big flood happens. So like 2018, we had what equated to 1,000-year flood event in Ankeny, and sometimes the final emergency overflow it's a road or like is there a design like are you just like where's the water going to go when the big flood happens, and that is where that event caused us to learn a lot about thinking about that, and that was also for ponds and detention basins, because that water is pretty intense. So that's where I think we've had to learn a little bit and make some adjustments as for being ready for the big flood to come into these systems.
Okay. All right, next one. Oh, could you talk about cost and cost share programs for these?
Yeah, so I would say the vast majority of these sites are being done on public lands. We're doing some in conjunction with private developers who are using it as their tool. So say they're going to build 100 acres of houses, they've considered using stormwater wetlands as like their stormwater management tool for the sites. But we do know that generally like homeowners associations aren't set up nearly as well to take care of like big wetlands. They can generally handle ponds better. Um, so normally it's like a lot of times it's a case by case basis. In the Des Moines Metro, it's kind of unique that all the cities they actually pay into the Polk County team for us to provide this technical assistance. So we a lot of times we proactively come to cities with project opportunities, with grants to go after. We've used like the most common funding source for these wetlands is the Urban Water Quality Initiative through IDOLS. Every fall they come out with an urban grant program. It's a 50-50 cost share split. So that's a big funding source. The other one is I think it's safe to say every city in the Des Moines Metro, they also have a stormwater utility fee. So every homeowner generally pays $5 to $20 a month for stormwater management. Now, 15 years ago, that just went to putting more big pipes in the ground. But now that money is a lot of times used, it's collected. And what we found is, say you install a wetland, your downstream pipe might be half the size, and you actually save money by installing a wetland. So that's where we get a lot of our funding as well. And it's really tailored to like local city by city goals. Some cities are really into this stuff. Some cities is like, you think you were saying a curse word if you said wetland in their community. So it varies.
Okay, I got a question for you, John. How many municipalities do you work with? You might have said this before.
So like in our formal partnership, there's 18 municipalities
Okay.
to Polk County, through our watershed management authorities. And
Okay.
we provide this very technical assistance to them.
Okay, cool. Um, you said consider stream incision. What are some of the practices you may use to address this?
Yeah. So again, another presentation, but we have a new program. We're actually going to be we're going to be stabilizing over 10 miles of stream in the next 2.5 years. And that is a direct result of our streams have gone crazy, crazy bad. Like in Walnut Creek, about 1% of our assessed stream banks were considered stable. So and like, so the banks are washing away, the stream's getting deeper. It's correlated one and one together. So that's a major focus of our stream restoration program is to do things like that look like riffles. We call them grade controls to actually lock in the bottom of the stream or even lift the bottom of the stream back up and let it reconnect to the floodplain. That's what if we had a stream that's very in size, I would push people away from doing oxbow restorations because they're a lot less cost effective if you have to dig that deep, and they're going to have less environmental benefit. They'll have more flood storage, but you're basically just digging a big U-shaped hole. So we're largely trying to do like mile stretches of stream restoration rather than like just we used to just rip wrap a bank here and there to protect a house or a road.
Mhm.
But now we're looking at, okay, if we address this like the worst section of stream, how do you like restore the whole reach, including raising it back up and let it get reconnected to the floodplain, which then is gonna reduce stream capacity, reduce flows, and improve stream stability. So that's again a whole nother great presentation to be had.
Okay.
Good
Well,
question, Joe.
yeah, we will have to get you back for that one for sure. Um, when you do some of the excavation, do you excavate down to the water table?
Generally, yes. So we're usually working like adjacent to streams. And so normally you start digging, you're going to hit that 4 to 5 foot region. You're almost always going to hit groundwater. And that's important for several reasons. One, groundwater connections are good because you're going to bring in oxygenated water to the system. But also, say, like, we wanted our wetland to be 10 foot deep, open space for flood storage. Well, once you get 4 foot down, it's going to be water. So there's no use to keep digging. So understanding some of those hydraulics, and so the big thing we now do on every site is we actually do full soil core samples of the wetland to really know what we're going to get into as far as soil types. Also important because if we're going to dig and we want to say a developer is going to take all the dirt for us and they want to level off a property, is that dirt suitable for development? Oxbows we're generally always designing to that groundwater depth. So groundwater is a very important aspect of both of these wetland types.
This was a question more up toward the top. I don't think I asked it though. Do you have problems with winter fish kill in your artificially constructed oxbow wetlands?
Uh, we haven't. Well, I haven't personally seen them.
Okay.
I have concerns, especially about those ones with inside streams where we only have and we've been in like a 3 year drought. We built a lot of these oxbow. We built like 18 one year, like 6 years ago. We went a little oxbow crazy. Uh, there's a direct difference about the ones that generally hold like say thigh deep water, which is a lot of times what you see like in the Boone and Raccoon River watershed, to those that are like directly tied to the depth of water in the stream. So if the stream's deep, the oxbow's deep. If the stream's shallow, the oxbow's shallow. I'm sure fish kills have happened in those ones that are directly connected to the
Mhm.
water table.
Okay. All right. John, I think we got most of the questions there. So really appreciate you participating in this webinar, giving this, and hopefully we can get you back because all the other projects you have going on, I think would be really interesting to our audience.
All kinds of fun. Happy to be here. Glad to share. Give me a holler if anybody has any additional questions or you want to go look at the wetland site. Let's do it.
Yeah, I can attest that John plans a good field tour. So
Yeah,
not to add more work to him, but he does. Yeah, they're great. Thanks again, John.
yep. Thanks, Matt.
Yep. All right.